The bullet that killed Daniel Bryant in the winter of 1876 took more than just a husband from Delilah Bryant. It took her place in the world, or so the people of Fort Bridger, Wyoming, seemed to think. 3 months after they buried Daniel in the frozen ground behind the church, the invitations to Sunday suppers stopped coming. The neighborly visits dried up like summer streams, and even the shopkeepers began looking through her as though she were made of glass, fragile and already broken beyond repair. Delilah stood at the window of her small house on the edge of town, watching the late March wind push tumbleweeds down the main street. She was 24 years old and felt ancient. Her reflection in the wavy glass showed a woman with dark hair pulled back severely, brown eyes that had lost their brightness, and a mouth that had forgotten how to smile. The black morning dress she wore had faded to a dusty gray from too many washings, and she could not afford to replace it. The little money Daniel had saved was nearly gone. She had tried to find work, but Fort Bridger was a town that did not know what to do with a woman alone. The schoolteacher position went to a man from back east. The general store owner told her he had no need for help, though she had seen him hire his nephew 2 days later. Even the laundry work she had begged for had been given to someone else, someone with a husband and children who supposedly needed it more. Delilah had begun to understand that she had become invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of a town that had no use for her. The other women avoided her eyes at church, as though widowhood might be contagious. The men looked uncomfortable in her presence, unsure how to speak to a woman without a husband to address first. She existed in a strange limbo, neither wife nor maiden, belonging nowhere and to no one. She had not eaten a proper meal in 2 days. The larder held only a handful of dried beans and some flour that was more weevil than wheat. Her stomach had stopped growling and now just ached with a dull, constant pain. She had sold everything she could: Daniel's watch, her mother's silver brush, even the good quilt that had been a wedding present. The money had gone to pay the mortgage on the house, but she was still 3 months behind, and the banker had made it clear that his patience was not infinite. That afternoon, Delilah wrapped her thin shawl around her shoulders and walked into town, her head held high despite the shame that burned in her chest. She was going to do something she had never imagined she would have to do. She was going to ask the church for charity. Reverend Michaels was in the sanctuary practicing his sermon for Sunday. He looked up when she entered, and something flickered across his face: sympathy perhaps, or maybe just discomfort. "Mrs. Bryant," he said, setting down his notes, "how can I help you?" The words stuck in her throat like broken glass. "I need help, Reverend. I have no food and I cannot find work. I was hoping the church might have something, some way I could. The church fund is quite depleted at the moment," he said quickly, not meeting her eyes. "The winter was hard on everyone. Perhaps if you have family elsewhere who could take you in." "My family is all gone, sir. Daniel was all I had." The Reverend shifted his weight from foot to foot. "Well, I will certainly pray on your situation, Mrs. Bryant. Perhaps something will come along. The Lord provides, you know." Delilah left the church with tears threatening to spill, but she refused to let them fall where anyone might see. "The Lord provides," the Reverend had said, but she was beginning to wonder if the Lord had forgotten about her along with everyone else. She was walking back toward her house, head down against the wind, when she nearly collided with a man on the boardwalk. Strong hands caught her shoulders, steadying her. "Careful there, madam." Delilah looked up into a face she recognized but did not know well. Thomas Lawson was a rancher who lived several miles outside of town. He came into Fort Bridger once a month or so for supplies, a quiet man who kept to himself. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that fell across his forehead. His eyes were a striking gray-blue, like storm clouds over the mountains, and they were looking at her now with an expression she had not seen in months. Genuine concern. "I apologize," she said, stepping back quickly. "I was not watching where I was going. No harm done." He did not move away, and his eyes searched her face. "You are Mrs. Bryant, are you not? Daniel Bryant's wife?" "Widow," she corrected automatically, hating the word. Something shifted in Thomas Lawson's expression. "I heard about Daniel. I am sorry for your loss. He was a good man." Most people offered those empty platitudes and then hurried away. But Thomas Lawson stood there on the boardwalk, still looking at her with those storm cloud eyes, as though he actually saw her. It was such a strange feeling after months of invisibility that Delilah did not know how to respond. "Thank you," she finally managed. A gust of wind whipped down the street, and Delilah pulled her thin shawl tighter. She saw Thomas notice the inadequate wrap, the worn dress, the way her cheekbones stood out too sharply in her face. His jaw tightened. "Have you eaten today, Mrs. Bryant?" The direct question startled her. That is not your concern, Mr. Lawson. That sounds like a no." He glanced down the street toward the restaurant. "Would you allow me to buy you a meal? I was just heading in for an early supper myself." Pride warred with hunger, and hunger won. "I could not impose. It would be no imposition. I dislike eating alone, and it would be a kindness to me to have company." The way he said it made it sound as though she would be doing him a favor, which they both knew was a lie, but it was a gracious lie, and Delilah found herself nodding before she could think better of it. The restaurant was nearly empty at this hour. Thomas chose a table near the back and held her chair with an old-fashioned courtesy that made her throat tight. When was the last time someone had treated her like a person worthy of consideration? The waitress brought them menus, and Delilah tried not to stare at the list of foods like a starving animal. When Thomas ordered the steak dinner with all the sides, Delilah asked for only soup, her voice barely above a whisper. "She will have the steak as well," Thomas told the waitress firmly. "And bring some bread to start, please." "Mr. Lawson, I cannot." "You can," he said simply. "And you will. When was the last time you had a proper meal, Mrs. Bryant? And please be honest with me." Delilah looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. They were thinner than they should be, the wedding ring loose on her finger. 4 days ago. Breakfast. Some cornmeal mush." Thomas said nothing, but she heard his sharp intake of breath. When she dared to look up, his expression was carefully controlled, but anger flickered in those gray-blue eyes. Not anger at her, she realized, but at the situation, at the town that had let this happen. The bread arrived, warm and soft with real butter. Delilah tried to eat slowly, to maintain some dignity, but the first bite awakened such desperate hunger that she had to force herself not to weep. Thomas kept up a steady stream of quiet conversation, telling her about his ranch, the early spring calving, the new barn he was building, giving her time to compose herself. "You run the ranch alone?" she asked, grateful for the distraction. "I have 3 men who work for me." "Good men, reliable." "The ranch is about 8 miles north of town, up in the valley near the Green River. It is beautiful country, open grassland with the mountains rising up behind. I have about 300 head of cattle, some horses. It is a good life, though sometimes lonely." The steak arrived, thick and juicy, with potatoes and vegetables and gravy. Delilah had to blink back tears at the sight of so much food. She cut a small piece of meat and put it in her mouth, closing her eyes at the taste. She had forgotten that food could be like this, rich and satisfying. Thomas watched her eat with an expression she could not quite read. After a few minutes, he said quietly, "Daniel spoke of you often, you know, before he died." Delilah looked up in surprise. "You knew Daniel. We were not close friends, but we had business dealings. I bought some lumber from him last year for my barn. He was proud of you, talked about how you kept the best garden in town, how you had a way with people. He said you made his house a home. Fresh grief welled up, but it was softer than the sharp pain she had been living with, gentled somehow by the knowledge that Daniel had spoken well of her to others. He was a good husband. I miss him terribly. I imagine you do. Thomas paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. May I ask what you plan to do? Do you have prospects, a way to support yourself? The question was intrusive, but something about Thomas Lawson made her want to answer honestly. Perhaps it was because he was the first person in months who seemed to actually care about the answer. I have no prospects, she admitted. I have tried to find work, but no one will hire me. The house is mortgaged and I am behind on payments. I have sold everything of value. I do not know what I will do. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I am frightened, Mr. Lawson, truly frightened. Thomas set down his fork and looked at her directly. I have a proposition for you, Mrs. Bryant. I want you to hear me out before you say no. Delilah felt a flutter of something in her chest, hope or fear. She could not tell which. My ranch is successful, but it is not complete. A ranch needs a woman's touch, a garden, proper meals, a clean house. My men and I live like bachelors, eating beans and bacon, wearing clothes that are more patch than original fabric. I need someone to keep house, to cook, to manage the domestic side of things. I would like to offer you that position. A housekeeper, Delilah said slowly. Yes, I can pay you $30 a month plus room and board. There is a small cabin on the property that would be yours, private and separate from the main house. You would have security, food, a roof over your head. And you would be helping me in return. It would be a fair exchange, not charity. $30 a month. It was more than she had dared hope for. But moving out to a ranch, alone with a man she barely knew and his hired hands, it would destroy what little reputation she had left. People would talk, she said. People are already talking, Mrs. Bryant. Or rather, they are not talking, they are forgetting. You are disappearing from this town and no one seems to notice or care. At least at the ranch, you would have purpose, safety, a future. He was right and they both knew it. Still, Delilah hesitated. Why are you doing this? You do not know me. Thomas looked down at his plate, then back at her. Daniel asked me to. What? The day before he died, he came to see me. I did not think much of it at the time. He said he wanted to discuss another lumber order. But before he left, he stood at the door and said something strange. He said, if anything ever happens to me and my Delilah needs help, I hope there will be someone decent enough to remember her. He looked me right in the eye when he said it, as though he knew something was coming. Delilah felt tears spill over despite her best efforts to contain them. He knew he was in danger. There had been threats over a land dispute. He did not tell me how serious it was. He wanted to protect you. Thomas reached across the table and, after a moment's hesitation, laid his hand over hers. The gesture was improper, but somehow it felt right, a human connection in a world that had grown cold. Let me honor his request, Mrs. Bryant. Let me remember you since everyone else has forgotten. Delilah looked at this stranger who was offering her salvation, who had seen her when she had become invisible, who had known her husband, and was trying to keep a promise that had never been explicitly made. She thought about the empty house, the hunger, the fear that had become her constant companion. She thought about the town that had erased her from its consciousness. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will come to your ranch. Thomas's hand tightened on hers for just a moment before he withdrew it. Good. Can you be ready to leave tomorrow? I will bring a wagon for your belongings. I have few belongings left. Tomorrow would be fine. They finished their meal in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, full of possibility rather than emptiness. When Thomas paid the bill and walked her back to her house, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. At her door, he tipped his hat to her. "Until tomorrow, Mrs. Bryant." "Until tomorrow, Mr. Lawson, and thank you for remembering." He smiled, a slow smile that transformed his weathered face. "That is something I could never forget to do." That night, Delilah packed her few remaining possessions into a single trunk. She sat on the edge of the bed she had shared with Daniel and allowed herself to cry, really cry, for the first time since the funeral. She cried for Daniel, for the life they had planned together, for the cruelty of a town that had abandoned her in her darkest hour. But she also cried with relief, with gratitude, with the first tentative stirrings of hope. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Thomas arrived with the wagon as promised, along with one of his ranch hands, a young man named Billy who tipped his hat politely and helped load her trunk without comment. The few neighbors who were outside watched with curious eyes as Delilah locked the door of the house she had shared with Daniel, but no one came over to ask where she was going or wish her well. Thomas noticed her looking back at the watching faces. "They will talk no matter what you do," he said quietly. "Better to give them something worth talking about." The ride to the ranch took nearly 2 hours. Thomas drove the wagon while Billy rode alongside on horseback. They traveled north along the Green River, the landscape opening up into rolling grassland dotted with early spring wildflowers. The mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks still white with snow. It was beautiful country, wild and open and free in a way that Fort Bridger, with its narrow streets and narrower minds, had never been. Thomas pointed out landmarks as they drove the bend in the river where he sometimes fished, the stand of cottonwoods that provided shade in summer, the rocky outcrop where eagles nested. He spoke easily, his voice deep and calm, and Delilah found herself relaxing for the first time in months. "There," Thomas said finally, pointing ahead. "That is home." The ranch spread out before them in a sheltered valley. The main house was a sturdy log structure with a covered porch and a stone chimney. Several outbuildings surrounded it, a barn, a bunkhouse for the hired men, corrals for the horses. And off to the side, nestled among a grove of aspen trees, was a small cabin with a red door. "That is your cabin," Thomas said. "It was the original house on the property, built by the first settler here. I have been using it for storage, but Billy and the boys helped me clean it out and fix it up over the past few days. It is not much, but it is sturdy and warm." Delilah stared at the little cabin with its cheerful red door and felt something unfurl in her chest, a place of her own. A place where she could breathe. Thomas helped her down from the wagon and they walked over to the cabin. He pushed open the door and Delilah stepped inside. It was indeed small, just one large room with a sleeping alcove, a stone fireplace, a table and chairs, a rocking chair by the window. But it was clean, and there were curtains at the windows, and someone had left a jar of wildflowers on the table. "Billy's mother made the curtains," Thomas said, standing in the doorway. "She was glad to hear I was finally getting some proper help around here. The boys are all good men, Mrs. Bryant, respectful, you need not fear them." "I am not afraid," Delilah said, and realized it was true. She turned to face Thomas. "This is wonderful, Mr. Lawson, truly. I do not know how to thank you." "No thanks necessary. We are helping each other, remember." He smiled again, that slow transformation of his face. "Come, let me show you the main house so you can see what you are getting yourself into." The main house was exactly as Thomas had described, functional but chaotic. Dirty dishes were piled in the kitchen, dust coated every surface, and the curtains were stiff with grime. Delilah surveyed the mess with the first stirring of purpose she had felt in months. "Where do you keep the cleaning supplies?" she asked. Thomas looked embarrassed. I confess we are rather low on such things. I can have Billy ride into town tomorrow for whatever you need. Make me a list of what foods you and the men prefer, and what supplies we have on hand. I will make a proper list of what is needed." Delilah walked through the kitchen, already mentally organizing the work ahead. "Do the men eat here or in the bunkhouse?" "We usually eat together in the bunkhouse, but with you here, I thought perhaps you could cook in this kitchen, and we could take our meals in the main house." "Unless that is too much work." "It is what you are paying me for, Mr. Lawson. I will manage." They spent the rest of the morning going through the house and outbuildings so Delilah could understand the full scope of the ranch. Thomas introduced her to his other two hired hands, Frank, a grizzled man in his 50s who had been a cowboy all his life, and Sam, a quiet man in his 30s who had come west after the war. Both men were polite but reserved, clearly unsure what to make of her presence. By noon, Delilah was exhausted but energized in a way she had not been since Daniel's death. She had purpose again, a reason to get up in the morning. Thomas had Billy drive her back into town to retrieve a few more things from her house and to visit the general store with a list of supplies. At the store, the owner, Mr. Henderson, looked surprised to see her with Billy. "Mrs. Bryant, I hear you are working for Thomas Lawson now." "I am his housekeeper, yes." Mr. Henderson's expression was disapproving. "Seems an unusual arrangement for a respectable widow." "Seems an unusual town that lets a respectable widow starve," Delilah replied coolly. "I will take everything on this list, please, and have it charged to Mr. Lawson's account." She had the satisfaction of seeing Mr. Henderson's face flush before he turned to fill her order. Billy, waiting by the door, grinned at her when Henderson's back was turned. That first night at the ranch, Delilah cooked her first meal for the household beef stew with fresh bread and apple pie made from dried apples. The men ate with the focused intensity of people who had been living on inadequate food for too long. Afterward, Frank pushed back from the table and said, "Madam, that was the finest meal I have had in 5 years. We are mighty glad you are here." "Thank you, Frank. I am glad to be here." When the dishes were done and the men had retired to the bunkhouse, Thomas walked Delilah back to her cabin in the gathering dusk. The spring air was cool and filled with the scent of sage. "You did well today," Thomas said. "I hope it was not too overwhelming." "It was wonderful," Delilah said honestly. "I feel useful again. That is a gift, Mr. Lawson." "Thomas," he said, "if we are to live and work in close proximity, formality seems unnecessary, and I would be honored if you would call me by my given name." "Then you must call me Delilah." "Delilah," he repeated, and her name in his deep voice sent an unexpected shiver through her. "It suits you, biblical and strong." At the door of her cabin, Delilah turned to face him. In the twilight, his eyes were more gray than blue, serious and kind. "Why did you really do this, Thomas?" "The truth this time." He was quiet for a long moment, then said, "Because I know what it is to be forgotten. When I first came west 10 years ago, I had nothing, no money, no prospects, no family. I worked as a ranch hand, and for a long time, no one saw me as anything more than a pair of hands. It was a man named Joseph Carter who gave me my first real chance, who loaned me the money to buy this land and start my ranch. He believed in me when no one else did. Joseph died 3 years ago, and I never got to fully repay him, not in the way that mattered. When I saw you yesterday, so thin and tired, disappearing before the eyes of a town that should have protected you, I saw a chance to honor Joseph's memory, to be for someone else what he was for me. I am not a charity project, Thomas. I know that. You are a woman of strength and dignity who has been treated abominably. But you are not a project, Delilah. You are a solution to a genuine need I have, and I am grateful you agreed to come here." Delilah looked at this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had been afraid to voice. "I will work hard for you, Thomas, I promise." "I know you will. Sleep well, Delilah. Tomorrow we start fresh." She watched him walk back to the main house, a tall figure against the darkening sky, and felt the strangest sensation, not quite happiness, not yet, but the possibility of happiness. The space where happiness might grow, given time and care. The next weeks fell into a rhythm that was at once exhausting and satisfying. Delilah rose before dawn to start breakfast for the men: eggs and bacon and biscuits with gravy, strong coffee that could strip paint. After they rode out to work the cattle or mend fences, or whatever the day's tasks required, she set to work transforming the main house from a bachelor's chaos into a proper home. She scrubbed floors until they gleamed, beat the dust from curtains, organized the pantry, and planted a kitchen garden behind the house. She cooked 3 meals a day, each one more substantial than the last, watching with satisfaction as the men's faces filled out and their energy increased. She mended their clothes, patched their work shirts, and knitted new socks to replace the ones that were more whole than fabric. And slowly, without quite meaning to, she began to heal. The work kept her hands busy and her mind occupied. The open spaces of the ranch gave her room to breathe. The men treated her with respect, and Thomas treated her with a careful kindness that never crossed the line into impropriety. They were housekeeper and employer, nothing more, but there was a growing ease between them that felt like the beginning of friendship. Thomas had a habit of appearing in the kitchen in the late afternoon, after the day's work was mostly done, to sit at the table and talk while Delilah prepared supper. He told her about the ranch, about his plans to expand the herd, about the year he had spent in California before deciding that Wyoming was where he wanted to put down roots. She found herself telling him things in return about her childhood in Ohio, about her parents who had died of fever when she was 18, about how she had met Daniel at a church social and married him 3 months later. "Were you happy with him?" Thomas asked one afternoon, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. "I was," Delilah said, peeling potatoes. "He was steady and kind, and he loved me. I suppose we were not passionate in the way some couples are, but we were content. I thought we would have 50 years together." Her voice caught. "It does not seem fair that we got only 3. "No," Thomas agreed. "It does not seem fair at all. Do you ever think about marrying?" The question was bold, but the easy conversation had made her brave. Thomas looked into his coffee cup. "I think about it sometimes. But ranching is hard work, and I am gone long hours. It would take a special kind of woman to want this life. Someone strong and independent who would not mind the isolation." "Someone like me, you mean," Delilah said without thinking, and then froze, mortified by her own words. But Thomas just looked at her steadily. "Yes," he said, "someone exactly like you." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Then Sam called from outside, needing Thomas's help with a horse that had thrown a shoe, and the moment passed. But something had shifted, some acknowledgement of an attraction that neither of them was quite ready to name. That night, lying in her narrow bed in the cabin with the red door, Delilah admitted to herself what she had been trying to ignore for weeks. She was developing feelings for Thomas Lawson. Real feelings, not just gratitude or respect, but something deeper. The way her heart lifted when she heard his voice, the way she found herself watching for him throughout the day, the way his rare smiles made her feel warm from the inside out. It was too soon. Daniel had been dead only 5 months. What kind of woman fell in love again so quickly? Guilt washed over her, but beneath the guilt was something else: the stubborn insistence of her own heart that love, once found, should not be denied simply because it came at an inconvenient time. She thought Daniel would understand. He had been a practical man, and he would not have wanted her to spend the rest of her life alone out of some misguided sense of eternal mourning. He had asked Thomas to remember her, to help her. Perhaps this was part of that help, the slow awakening of her heart to the possibility of joy again. But did Thomas feel the same way? His comment that afternoon had been ambiguous could have meant many things, and even if he did harbor feelings for her, would he act on them? He was too honorable to press his attentions on an employee who was dependent on him for her livelihood. The situation was impossible, Delilah decided. She would have to content herself with friendship and be grateful for that much. Spring progressed into early summer. The mountains lost their snow caps, and the valley exploded into green life. Delilah's garden flourished under her care, producing lettuce and radishes and early peas. The cattle grew fat on the rich grass, and Thomas's face began to lose the worried lines it had carried when she first met him. The ranch was prospering, and everyone on it seemed lighter, happier. In early June, Thomas had to make a trip to Cheyenne to finalize the sale of some cattle. He would be gone for 4 days. Before he left, he found Delilah in the garden, weeding between rows of carrots. "I do not like leaving you here with just the men," he said, "but I trust them to be gentlemen, and I know you can handle yourself." "I will be fine, Thomas. It is only 4 days. Frank is in charge while I am gone. If you need anything at all, you tell him." "I will." Thomas hesitated, his hat in his hands. "Delilah, I wonder if I might speak frankly with you before I go." "Of course. These past 2 months have been some of the best of my life. The ranch feels like a home now, not just a place where I work and sleep. You have brought light to this place, and joy, and I find myself thinking things I should not be thinking, feeling things that are perhaps inappropriate given our situation." Delilah's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. She stood slowly, brushing dirt from her hands. "What things, Thomas? I think you know." His gray-blue eyes searched her face. "I am drawn to you, Delilah. More than drawn, I am falling in love with you. I know it is too soon. I know you are still mourning Daniel. I know I am your employer and I should not speak of such things. But I am going to be gone for 4 days, and the thought of leaving without telling you how I feel was unbearable. You do not have to say anything in return. I just needed you to know." Delilah's breath caught. "Thomas, no, let me finish. When I return from Cheyenne, if you wish to continue as we have been, as employer and employee, as friends, I will respect that. Nothing needs to change. Your position here is secure regardless of your feelings. I would never use my position to pressure you. I just wanted you to know that I see you, Delilah Bryant. I have been seeing you since that first day on the boardwalk, and I have not stopped seeing you since." Before she could respond, before she could tell him that her feelings mirrored his own, Billy called from the barn that the wagon was ready. Thomas gave her one last long look, then turned and walked away, leaving Delilah standing in the garden with her heart in her throat and 100 unspoken words on her lips. The 4 days of Thomas's absence were the longest of Delilah's life. She threw herself into work, reorganizing the pantry, making preserves from early strawberries, sewing new curtains for the main house. But her mind was always on Thomas, on his confession, on what she would say when he returned. She examined her feelings from every angle. Was this real love or just gratitude wearing love's disguise? Was it too soon after Daniel's death? What would people say? But every time she asked herself these questions, the same answer came back. Her heart knew what it wanted, and her heart wanted Thomas Lawson. On the 3rd night, Frank joined her on the porch after supper, carrying his pipe. "May I sit, madam?" "Of course, Frank." The old cowboy settled into a chair with a sigh. "I have been working for Thomas for near about 8 years now," he said, puffing his pipe. "I have seen him through hard times and good. He is as fine a man as I have ever known, honest, fair, works harder than any man I have met. But he has been lonely, though he would never say so." "Why are you telling me this, Frank?" "Because I saw the way he looked at you before he left, and I saw the way you looked at him. And I wanted you to know that if you are thinking Thomas Lawson is the kind of man you could build a life with, you would be thinking right. He would be good to you, madam. He would honor you and cherish you all the days of his life." Delilah felt tears prick her eyes. "I believe he would. Then do not let worry about what others think stand in your way. Life is too short and happiness too rare to turn away from it when it comes." "Thank you, Frank. That means more than you know." The old cowboy stood, tipped his hat, and walked back toward the bunkhouse, leaving Delilah alone with her thoughts and the vast starry sky overhead. Thomas returned late on the fourth day, dusty and tired from travel. Delilah heard the wagon and met him in front of the main house, suddenly shy now that the moment was upon them. "How was your trip?" she asked. "Successful. I got a good price for the cattle." He climbed down from the wagon, his eyes never leaving her face. "How were things here?" "Quiet. Everyone behaved themselves. I made a chicken pie for your supper. It is warming in the oven." They stood there in the twilight, a careful distance between them, the weight of unspoken things pressing down. "Thomas," Delilah said finally, "I need to tell you something." "You do not have to say anything, Delilah. I meant what I said. Nothing has to change. But I want things to change." She took a step closer. "These 4 days you were gone felt like 4 years. I kept thinking about what you said, about seeing me, about falling in love. And I realized that I have been falling in love with you too. I fought it because I felt guilty, because I thought it was too soon, because I was afraid. But Frank said something to me, and it made me understand that turning away from love out of fear is a waste of the gift we have been given." Thomas closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He took her hands in his calloused thumbs rubbing gently over her knuckles. "Are you certain, Delilah? I need you to be certain, because once we start down this path, I will not be able to stop loving you. I will love you for the rest of my life." "I am certain," she whispered. "I love you, Thomas. I think I have loved you since that first day when you saw me, really saw me, when I had become invisible to everyone else. You remembered me when everyone had forgotten, and you gave me back my life. How could I not love you for that?" He raised one hand to cup her face, his touch infinitely gentle. "I am going to kiss you now, if that is all right. Please," she breathed. His lips met hers softly, carefully, a question and an answer all at once. It was nothing like the chaste kisses she had shared with Daniel, nothing like anything she had experienced before. This was heat and hunger tempered by tenderness, passion checked by respect. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Delilah. I know we should wait. I know there is propriety to consider, but I do not want to wait. I want you as my wife, my partner, the heart of my home. Marry me as soon as we can arrange it." Delilah thought about propriety, about what the people in Fort Bridger would say, about all the rules of mourning she would be breaking. And then she thought about how those same people had abandoned her when she needed them most, how their rules had nearly let her starve, how their judgment was worthless. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you, Thomas Lawson, tomorrow if you can arrange it." He laughed, the sound full of joy. Tomorrow might be pushing it, but soon, as soon as possible. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the ranch. Delilah wore a simple blue dress instead of white, and wildflowers instead of roses. Reverend Michaels came from town to perform the ceremony, his expression carefully neutral, though Delilah could see the disapproval in his eyes. Frank stood up as Thomas's witness, and Billy's mother, Mrs. Henderson, stood for Delilah, the only woman in Fort Bridger who had spoken to her kindly when word of the engagement spread through town. The ceremony was brief and simple. Thomas's voice was steady as he made his vows, his eyes never leaving Delilah's face. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed her with such tenderness that Delilah felt her last reservations melt away. This was right. This was where she was meant to be. After the ceremony, they had a small celebration dinner. The hired hands toasted them with glasses of whiskey, and Mrs. Henderson brought a cake. As the sun set and the guests departed, Thomas led Delilah into the main house, which was now truly their home. "I moved your things from the cabin while you were getting ready this morning," he said. "I hope that was all right. I thought you might prefer not to go back there tonight." That was very thoughtful. He led her upstairs to the bedroom, which Delilah had never seen before. It was a large room with a big bed and windows overlooking the valley. Someone had put fresh wildflowers on the dresser. Thomas turned to face her, suddenly seeming nervous. "Delilah, I want you to know that I have no expectations for tonight. We can take this as slowly as you need. If you want to just sleep, we can just sleep." Delilah smiled, loving him even more for his consideration. She stepped close and began unbuttoning his shirt. "I am your wife now, Thomas, and I want to be your wife in every way. I am not afraid." What passed between them that night was private and precious, a joining not just of bodies but of souls. Thomas was gentle and patient, mindful of her limited experience, and Delilah discovered that physical love could be an expression of the deepest emotional intimacy. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed, skin against skin, and Delilah felt a peace she had not known since before Daniel's death, perhaps even deeper than any peace she had known before. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Thomas replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Sleep now, my wife. We have the rest of our lives ahead of us." The rest of that summer passed in a blur of happiness. Delilah had never imagined she could be this content. The ranch kept them both busy, but they stole moments together throughout each day, Thomas coming in for midday dinner, Delilah bringing him water when he worked in the near pastures, evenings spent on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. In August, Delilah realized she was pregnant. She told Thomas one evening as they sat together after supper, his arm around her shoulders. "Already," he said, his face breaking into a grin. "That was fast work. Are you pleased?" "Pleased, Delilah, I am overjoyed." He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "A child, our child." "I hope it is a boy," Delilah said. "A son who looks just like his father. Boy or girl, it does not matter, as long as you are both healthy." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Delilah felt well and continued her work around the ranch, though Thomas tried to get her to slow down. "You need to rest more," he would say, worry in his eyes. "I am pregnant, not ill," she would reply. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. I am fine." But she did accept some help. Thomas hired a young woman from town, Mary Phillips, to come out twice a week to help with the heavier cleaning. Mary was 17 and shy, but a hard worker, and Delilah enjoyed her company. In February of 1877, on a cold night when the wind howled around the house, Delilah went into labor. Thomas sent Billy racing to town for the doctor, while Mrs. Henderson, who had come to stay for the last few weeks of the pregnancy, took charge of the situation with calm efficiency. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the next day. Thomas paced outside the bedroom door, driven nearly mad by the sounds of Delilah's pain. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, a baby's cry split the air. Mrs. Henderson opened the door, her face flushed and smiling. You have a son, Mr. Lawson, a big, healthy boy. And your wife did beautifully." Thomas rushed past her to the bed where Delilah lay, exhausted but radiant, holding a bundle wrapped in blankets. "Look," she said, her voice hoarse. "Look at our son." Thomas took the baby carefully, marveling at the tiny face, the shock of dark hair, the perfect miniature fingers. "He is beautiful. You are beautiful. Thank you, Delilah. Thank you for this gift." They named him Daniel Joseph Lawson Daniel for Delilah's first husband, and Joseph for the man who had given Thomas his start. It felt right to honor both men who had shaped their lives. Daniel was a good baby, healthy and strong. He had Thomas's eyes and Delilah's smile, and both parents were utterly besotted with him. Thomas would sit for hours in the rocking chair by the fire, holding his son, talking to him about the ranch, about the cattle, about the life they would build together. Delilah watched her husband with their son and felt her heart could not hold any more love. This man who had saved her when she was forgotten, who had seen her when she was invisible, who had loved her when she thought she would never love again, he was everything good in her world. Life settled into a new rhythm with a baby in the house. The men took turns peeking in the windows to catch glimpses of Daniel, all of them charmed by the tiny human who ruled the household with his cries and coos. Frank carved a small horse from wood as a gift. Billy's mother brought tiny clothes she had sewn. Sam, the quiet one, surprised everyone by revealing a talent for lullabies in a low, tuneful voice that could settle Daniel when nothing else would. 2 years passed. Daniel grew into a sturdy toddler with boundless energy and a fearless nature that gave his mother heart palpitations. The ranch continued to prosper. Thomas bought more land and expanded the herd. They built an addition onto the house, adding a proper parlor and a second bedroom. And then, in the spring of 1879, Delilah found herself pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was harder. She was often tired and sometimes sick, and Thomas worried constantly. "Maybe we should move to town until the baby comes," he suggested more than once. "Absolutely not," Delilah replied. "I am staying right here with you and Daniel. I will be fine." This baby came faster than Daniel had, arriving in the early morning hours of November with much less fuss. Thomas was able to be in the room this time, holding Delilah's hand, coaching her through the pains. And when the baby emerged, red-faced and wailing, Thomas caught his daughter with tears streaming down his face. "A girl," he said in wonder. "We have a daughter." They named her Emily Ruth, and she looked nothing like her brother. Where Daniel was dark and sturdy, Emily was fair and delicate, with blue eyes like her father and a rosebud mouth. Thomas, who had been a devoted father to Daniel, became positively helpless in the face of his tiny daughter. "She has you wrapped around her little finger already," Delilah observed one evening, watching Thomas pace the floor with Emily, reluctant to put her down even though she was fast asleep. "I do not know what you mean," Thomas said, but his grin gave him away. With 2 young children, the house was constantly full of noise and chaos and joy. Daniel took his role as big brother seriously, always wanting to help with Emily, bringing her toys and patting her head with pudgy toddler hands. Delilah had never been so busy or so happy. The people of Fort Bridger gradually came to accept the marriage. When Delilah went to town with Thomas and the children, people nodded to her now, spoke to her, admired the babies. Some of the same women who had snubbed her when she was a widow now acted as though they had always been friends. Delilah was polite but distant. She had learned who her real friends were, and she did not forget. Mrs. Henderson remained a good friend, visiting often and bringing her now grown daughter to play with Daniel. Frank became like a grandfather to the children, teaching Daniel about horses and cattle, whittling toys for both children. The ranch was not just a workplace, it was a family. In the summer of 1881, Delilah and Thomas celebrated their 5th wedding anniversary. They left the children with Mrs. Henderson for the night and rode up into the mountains to a meadow Thomas had discovered, high above the ranch. They spread a blanket under the stars and held each other close. "You ever regret it?" Thomas asked. "Marrying me so quickly, tying yourself to this life?" "Never," Delilah said firmly. "How could I regret the greatest blessing of my life? You saved me, Thomas, not just from poverty and hunger, but from despair. You gave me back my hope, my purpose, my joy. You gave me a family. I love you more now than I did on our wedding day, and I did not think that was possible." "I feel the same," Thomas said, pulling her closer. "I had a good life before you came, but it was an empty life. You filled all the empty spaces, Delilah. You and the children, you are everything to me." They made love under the stars, and later, riding back down to the ranch in the moonlight, Delilah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The pain of losing Daniel, the cruelty of being forgotten by an entire town, the hunger and fear that had nearly broken her, all of it had led here, to this life, to this man, to this overwhelming happiness. She would not wish for the pain, but she could be grateful for where it had brought her. Life was strange that way, she thought. The worst moments sometimes led to the best outcomes if you were brave enough to keep going, to accept help when it was offered, to open your heart to love even when it felt too soon. 3 more years passed. Daniel started school, riding into town with Billy twice a week for lessons. Emily grew into a bright, chattering 4-year-old who followed her father everywhere, her constant shadow and devoted admirer. And in 1884, another baby joined the family, a son they named Matthew, after Thomas's father. Matthew had colic and rarely slept, keeping the entire household awake with his crying. "I forgot how hard babies are," Delilah said one night, walking the floor with the wailing infant while Thomas tried to comfort a tired and cranky Emily. "We will survive," Thomas said, though he looked as exhausted as she felt. And they did survive, because that was what families did. They supported each other through the hard times and celebrated together in the good times. The ranch continued to grow. Thomas bought out a neighboring property, doubling their land. They built a new barn and hired 2 more men to help with the increased workload. Daniel, at age 7, started learning to work cattle alongside his father. Emily begged to be allowed to learn too, and after some hesitation, Thomas agreed, teaching his daughter to ride and rope alongside her brother. Matthew grew out of his colic and became a happy, easy baby, content to sit in a basket near wherever his mother was working, watching the world with curious eyes. Delilah, now in her early 30s, sometimes paused in her work to marvel at the life she had built. The scared, starving widow of Fort Bridger seemed like a different person, someone from a story she had once heard. That woman was gone, transformed by love and purpose into someone strong and confident, secure in her place in the world. Sometimes, when she was working in her garden or cooking dinner or mending clothes by lamplight, she would look up to find Thomas watching her with such love in his eyes that it took her breath away. And she would remember that first day on the boardwalk, when he had been the only person in town to truly see her, and she would thank whatever providence had put him in her path. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas asked one evening, finding her standing by the window, staring out at the sunset. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Delilah said. "How blessed. I have everything I never knew I wanted: you, the children, this beautiful place. Sometimes I am afraid to be this happy, as though someone might take it all away." Thomas came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "No one is taking anything away. This is our life, Delilah. We have built it together, earned it, fought for it. It is ours, and it is real, and it is going to continue for a long, long time. Promise me, she said, turning in his arms to face him. I promise you, he said solemnly. I promise you 50 more years together, 60 if we can manage it. I promise you grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I promise you that when we are old and gray, we will sit together on this porch and watch the sun set over these mountains, and you will still be the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. I promise you, Delilah, that I will remember you every day for the rest of my life, just as I have remembered you every day since that afternoon on the boardwalk when I saw a brave woman refusing to let the world defeat her. Delilah kissed him then, a long, deep kiss that said everything words could not express. When they finally pulled apart, the sun had set completely, and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Come on," Thomas said, taking her hand. "Let us go check on the children, and then we can have some time to ourselves. I believe Matthew is finally sleeping through the night." "Do not jinx it," Delilah said, but she laughed as she said it, and hand in hand, they walked back into the house full of light and noise and life. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. There were hard winters when they worried about the cattle, droughts that tested their resources, illnesses that frightened them. But they faced each challenge together, and each trial overcome made them stronger. Daniel grew into a tall, capable young man who loved ranching as much as his father did. By the time he was 16, he was running his own string of cattle and talking about expanding into horse breeding. Emily, at 14, was as skilled a rider as her brother and had a gift for healing animals. She dreamed of becoming a veterinarian, something that shocked the more traditional folks in Fort Bridger, but that Thomas and Delilah encouraged wholeheartedly. Matthew, at 12, was the dreamer of the family, more interested in books and drawing than in cattle and horses. He talked about becoming an architect, about designing beautiful buildings. Thomas supported this ambition too, though privately he hoped at least one of his sons would want to take over the ranch someday. In 1894, when Delilah was 42 and thought her childbearing years were behind her, she found herself pregnant once more. The news shocked both her and Thomas. "Are you all right with this?" Thomas asked, concern creasing his face. "You are not as young as you were, and I worry." "I am fine," Delilah assured him. "Surprised, but fine. Perhaps God decided we needed one more blessing. This last baby was a girl they named Grace, and she was born healthy and perfect in the early spring of 1895. The older children adored their baby sister. Emily appointed herself assistant mother, always wanting to help care for Grace. Daniel carved a beautiful cradle for her. Matthew drew pictures of her constantly, trying to capture her expressions on paper. Thomas, now in his late 40s, was even more besotted with this daughter than he had been with Emily. "She is a miracle," he would say, holding the baby and marveling at her tiny perfection. "A gift we did not expect but definitely deserved." With Grace's arrival, the family felt complete. The ranch was thriving, the children were healthy and happy, and Thomas and Delilah's love had deepened into something rich and unshakable. They were partners in every sense of the word, working together to build not just a successful ranch but a legacy for their children. In 1898, Daniel married a young woman named Sarah from Fort Bridger, and they built a house on the eastern edge of the property. A year later, Sarah gave birth to a son, making Thomas and Delilah grandparents for the first time. They named the baby Thomas Daniel, and the old man cried when he held his grandson for the first time. "We are a dynasty now," Thomas said to Delilah that night. 4 generations in Wyoming, building something that will last. 5 generations if we are lucky," Delilah said, and Thomas grinned. Emily surprised everyone by not only becoming a veterinarian, but one of the first female veterinarians in Wyoming. She set up practice in Fort Bridger and soon had more business than she could handle. The same people who had once thought her ambitions unfeminine now bragged about having such a progressive town. Delilah and Thomas were immensely proud of her. Matthew went east to study architecture at a university in Chicago. He wrote long letters home describing the incredible buildings he was seeing, the things he was learning. Thomas missed his middle son but was glad the boy was following his dreams. "The world is bigger than this ranch," he told Delilah. "Our children should see as much of it as they want." Grace grew into a joyful child, curious and kind, beloved by everyone who met her. At age 6, she announced that she wanted to be a teacher, and Delilah began working with her on reading and writing, preparing her for that future. As the new century approached, Fort Bridger held a celebration. Thomas and Delilah attended with all their children and their grandson. Walking through the town that had once forgotten her, Delilah felt no bitterness, only satisfaction. She had survived, thrived, and built a beautiful life despite the town's cruelty. That was the best revenge, if revenge was even needed anymore. At the celebration, several of the older townspeople approached them. "You have built an impressive legacy," Mr. Henderson from the general store said. "The Lawson Ranch is the most successful in the territory. You should be proud." "We are," Thomas said, his arm around Delilah's waist. "Very proud." That night back at the ranch, they sat on the porch together, watching the stars and listening to the sounds of their children and grandson sleeping inside the house. "You remember the day we met?" Delilah asked. "Every detail," Thomas said. "You were walking with your head down, so thin and tired. You ran into me on the boardwalk, and when you looked up, I saw so much pain in your eyes. But I also saw strength, determination. I knew right then that you were someone special, someone worth knowing. I remember thinking you were the first person who had really looked at me in months, the first person who saw me as a human being rather than an inconvenience or an embarrassment." "I saw you," Thomas said simply. "I have been seeing you every day since. And I will see you every day for whatever time we have left." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built together. The ranch spread out before them in the moonlight, solid and prosperous. Inside the house, their children and grandson slept safely. It was more than either of them had ever dreamed of having. "You think Daniel knows?" Delilah asked quietly. "Do you think he knows that I am happy, that I found love again, that I am grateful for the life I have?" "I think he knows," Thomas said. "I think he is glad you did not waste your life mourning him. He loved you, Delilah. He would want you to be happy." "I am happy," Delilah whispered, "so very happy." As the years continued their march forward, Thomas and Delilah aged gracefully, their love deepening with each passing season. They celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary in 1901 with a large party that included not only their children and growing number of grandchildren, but most of the town of Fort Bridger. It was a testament to how much had changed, how thoroughly they had become pillars of the community. Thomas's hair turned silver, and lines deepened around his eyes, but to Delilah, he was as handsome as the day she had married him. Her own hair gained threads of gray, and her hands became work-worn, but Thomas still looked at her as though she were the most beautiful woman in the world. Daniel and Sarah had 3 children in total. Matthew married a woman he met in Chicago and settled there, becoming a successful architect. Emily married a fellow veterinarian, and they ran their practice together. Grace, true to her childhood ambition, became a teacher, beloved by her students and respected throughout the community. By 1910, Thomas and Delilah had 9 grandchildren, with more on the way. The ranch had been partially turned over to Daniel, though Thomas still worked every day, unable to fully retire from the land he loved. Delilah had slowed down a bit, but she still kept the garden, still cooked meals, still managed the household with the help of hired staff. They had lived to see automobiles arrive in Fort Bridger, had seen electricity come to town, had witnessed the world transform around them. But through all the changes, their love remained constant, the bedrock on which everything else was built. One evening in early summer of 1911, Thomas and Delilah sat together on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. Thomas was 62, Delilah 59. They were not young anymore, but they were healthy and happy, surrounded by family and blessed with a good life. "Do you remember what you promised me?" Delilah asked, her hand in his. "All those years ago, standing at the window watching the sunset. I promised you 50 years together," Thomas said. 60 if we could manage it." "We are halfway there," Delilah said with a smile. "I am holding you to that promise, Thomas Lawson." "I have never broken a promise to you yet," Thomas said, raising her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. "And I do not intend to start now." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple, they sat together in perfect contentment. The widow who had been forgotten by everyone had been remembered by the one person who mattered most. And that remembrance had blossomed into a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of seeing someone truly, of reaching out when others turn away, of believing in second chances and new beginnings. The ranch spread out before them, full of the sounds of their children and grandchildren playing in the yard. The cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. The mountains stood eternal against the sky. And Thomas and Delilah sat hand in hand, two people who had found each other in the darkest of times and built a life full of light. "I love you," Delilah whispered. "I love you too," Thomas replied. "Today, tomorrow, and always. I will remember you every day, Delilah, every single day." And he did. For the rest of their long, happy lives together, Thomas Lawson remembered the woman who had once been forgotten, and Delilah Bryant Lawson thrived in the warmth of being seen, being loved, being remembered. They lived to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Proof that love, when nurtured and honored, can grow into something beautiful beyond measure. Their story became a legend in Fort Bridger, passed down through generations, the tale of the widow who was forgotten by everyone, except the rancher who remembered her every day, and how that remembering changed both their lives forever. It was a story about the power of compassion, the strength of love, and the beautiful truth that sometimes the most important thing you can do for another person is simply to see them, truly see them, and remember that they matter. And in the end, that was exactly what Thomas Lawson had done for Delilah Bryant on that windy March day in 1876. He had seen her when she was invisible, remembered her when she was forgotten, and loved her when she thought she would never be loved again. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.